Right. Hello, everyone. My name is Quinn McAdam, and during these last 2 semesters, I've had the opportunity to get to write my own memoir called Choice All In, based on my time in competitive gymnastics. And it's been a really interesting process because I decided to do a hybrid project. So I wrote my memoir, and then I also did a critical analysis kind of my own memoir and memoir as a genre as a whole, talking about different critical conversations throughout. So in this presentation, I'm going to read excerpts of my memoir, as well as discuss some of the critical elements that we implemented throughout the semesters. So to give you a little bit of background, because I can't share the whole story with you tonight, I was in the sport of gymnastics from the years 2001 to 2014 at Deary's Gymnastics in Danielson, Connecticut. It's up by Killingly. An interesting fact is the building was once used as an armory, and actually in 1999, they leased the building to my former coach, Robin Deary Fillmore, and she turned it into the gym that's still there today. So I had 2 concussions during my time in the sport. So they were a little bit different, but they were similar in the sense that they were the same motion. So they're both front to back, so I either hit the front or back of my head in both of the concussions, damaging the same parts of the brain both times. It's actually a condition that my sports medicine specialist, Dr. David Wong, describes as overlapping concussion syndrome, which is when the first one hasn't completely healed, and so the effects of the second one are a lot more severe. And I did a lot of research on him, which was really interesting for this memoir. I required vestibular therapy, which is essentially the therapy of regaining your sense of balance when it's been altered through a head injury. So pretty much what was going on was my eyes would not move together. They wouldn't work together and they wouldn't move in a straight line. So I was unable to read for about 3 to 4 months following the injury, and I had to get this special therapy every week in order to regain that skill. And then following the injury, once I physically recovered, I had a battle with clinical depression and generalized anxiety disorder about my identity crisis without the sport that had been in my life since I was 3 years old, which was a really interesting kind of phenomenon because it was like a piece of me was actually missing, even though I was physically healed from the injury. So along that recovery process, I discovered my passion for writing, which luckily is still around today, and actually been put on the back burner for a really long time with gymnastics at the forefront of my focus. So it actually was something really good that came out of this time of my life, and through this class and reflecting on this experience, I've been able to create a renewed sense of identity for myself throughout my life and going forward. So for the first excerpt I'm going to read to you, it's actually the injury scene. Dr. DeRosa suggested I open my memoir with this scene because it puts you right in the action. It really draws the reader in and lets them know what's going on right away. So I'm going to read that to you. December 27th, 2013. I stood in the corner of the gymnastics floor I'd known for 13 years. My heels brushed against the tape marking the boundary line, and I took a deep breath, visualizing the skill I was about to attempt. I'd been training the double pike backflip for months prior. In fact, I'd been throwing around double backflips for years off of springboards into the foam pit. Our coaches loved letting us experiment with new tricks during our competition off-season. That was a playground of sorts, considering we'd spent most of our childhoods practicing in that gym. My mind was racing, toying with the idea of not going for the skill at all. I'd always let fear dictate my progress in the sport, always unsure of the injury that could be lying in wait on the other side of my attempt. But then, I heard all of my teammates and coaches cheering me on, willing me to go for the skill. I took my 3 steps into the tumbling pass, and in the first lead-up skill, I decided I was going for it. But you see, that's the thing. In gymnastics, you're all in or you're all out. When you go halfway, that's when things go wrong. In telling fear it had no power over me, I catapulted myself into the air, expecting a happily ever after landing. That isn't what I got. Gasps sounded throughout the gym as I crash-landed, under-rotating the skill entirely. At first, I feared for my ankles. I'd always had trouble with them, and it seemed as though my right one had been jammed on impact. However, when my breath finally released as I accepted the fall, I didn't feel injured. I was shaken, but okay. I stood to finish my routine, but my coach Robin told me to join her on the sidelines of the floor instead. "Take deep breaths," she said calmly as tears began to pool in my eyes. "You don't need to finish the routine, you just need to breathe." It was then that I realized how scary the fall must have looked. My mind was racing, but the thoughts just clouded together. I took deep breaths as instructed and let my thoughts keep going at high speed. The next day, I woke up with a pounding headache, reminiscing of when I'd had a minor concussion months before, except this time, the waves of pain seemed to echo into every crevice of my head, reminding me of my fall the day before in a steady rhythm. So that's the first section and the opener of the entire memoir. And the concept I want to introduce with this segment was the hero's quest concept, originally by Joseph Campbell. For my project, I didn't quite have time to read his whole book, so I used a synopsis by Christopher Vogler, which was very helpful. So the key stage of the hero's quest that I related this scene to in particular was the call to adventure. I feel like the call to adventure is usually more like, some leader coming to lead the hero into battle and so on and so forth. But for me, it was a devastating injury that led me into this process of discovering who I am without the sport and being able to say yes to myself in the sense that I wasn't going to give up because I lost this part of myself. And another point with the hero's quest is it's a very common thread within a lot of literature, and it can say that it's been overdone sometimes, but I think for memoir it's important to have a sense of familiarity in your writing for there to be a reader connection. There needs to be some level of something the reader can relate to within memoir in order for it to really make an impact. And that's it's key, especially in this genre, because you're speaking exclusively from personal experience and you need to connect with your reader on a deeper level. The next section I'm going to read is kind of about the mental game of gymnastics, and this goes back to when I was competing and on the team and kind of one of the struggles I faced within the gym. 2011. At first, I thought I was a swinger. In gymnastics terms, that means that the uneven bars were my best event. From my preschool days when the other kids were figuring out how to wrap their hands around the bar steadily enough to hang on, I was already pulling myself up and over the bar, supported only by my arms. That was the event I always looked forward to most. There was something about its rhythm and how everything morphed into one fluid motion. They are naturally a little bit scary, of course, with their metal tensions binding them steadily to the floor, the low bar standing at an easy 5 feet and the high bar looming at 10. But that rhythm you can get on a good day, that's worth continuing to swing, even though the risk can be so great. The first day I did a double back dismount off the bar we had over the foam pit immediately comes to my mind. I looked up at the pit bar and down at the foam pit, knowing that I trusted my equipment. I glanced at my coach, Kim, knowing that she fully trusted me to do this skill or she wouldn't suggested that I do it. And I knew I trusted her. Now it was just a matter of trusting myself. That's usually the hardest part of being a gymnast, to be honest. You can't control the equipment and you can't control what decisions your coaches will make, but you can control yourself. Somehow that sure thing becomes the biggest question you'd ever face. Do you trust yourself with the risk? I hopped up on the pit bar and did the lead-up scales into the dismount. I could feel my heart pounding as the moment drew near where I would have to be all in or all out. I did the second swing in a handstand and came back over the bar, picking up speed. I let go of the bar and was all in. I tucked my body in close and did 2 full rotations, opening up to land right side up in the pit. It was as good as I could have hoped for. I knew then that I was right to trust myself. So that gives you a little glimpse into the struggle I was facing in the first scene about going for the big skill on the floor, except this time it was a skill on bars and it went significantly better that time. So the aspect of fear is something really prevalent in gymnastics because you're doing these skills and you can get seriously injured on the vast majority of them. It's a very high risk sport, and I always struggled with that in my head of going for new things. But for this section, the memoir craft element that I wanted to focus on is the aspect of truth. And that can be very controversial about memoir because it is still a creative writing. It's not a documentation of events. You have to put your own creative spin on what happened to you to reveal the inner truth that you are trying to get across. And a lot of people have an issue with that because when minor details are changed, they claim, oh, it's not true, it's invalid, this has no relevance to literature at all. But actually for one of our scholars that we researched, Vivian Gornick, she had a different perspective on this. And she says, truth in a memoir is achieved not through a recital of actual events. It is achieved when the reader comes to believe that the writer is working hard to engage with the experience at hand. So essentially, what I did in this scene was, it might not be exactly how my teammates would recall it. It might not be exactly how my coach Kim would recall it, but it's how I recall it, and it's that inner truth that I'm trying to get across for the point of my narrative, and it's how I remember it. So that's the kind of truth that I'm bringing to the table, and that reading my memoir, you're going to hear my truth. And I think that's something that some struggle with, but it's an aspect of memoir that is really important to grasp if you're going to be able to fully appreciate it for what it is. The next scene is post-injury, and it's from my time in physical therapy, and that was not my favorite time at all. So I'll read from that section. February 2014. Physical therapy was not my favorite activity by any means. In fact, I was miserable to wake up in the morning, snoozing my alarm and going back to bed before Mom would come in and open the shades, so I got up for my appointment with Dr. Wong in physical therapy. I could tell how frustrated she was, but she kept it hidden for the most part. She knew it was much more frustrating for me. But here I was, her child who had been so motivated and cheerful, was suddenly refusing to get out of bed, and there was nothing she could do to help. No, I said, covering my head with my pillow, leave me in my dark room. It's how I spend every day anyway. It was true. I had a lot of limitations when it came to what I could physically handle at that time. No headphones, no TV, no phone, no exercise, no reading, no writing, no homework, and I had to keep my room dim at all times to avoid excess light. My spirits were dashed, and I couldn't see how any doctor or physical therapist could make it any better. My head was screwed up, I'd accepted it, and just wanted to move on in my new life of seclusion. I would never be what I was before. We're leaving in 10, was all Mom said before finally leaving the room, and we'll go to Olive Garden after. The bribery worked. She always fulfilled her promise. We pulled into the parking lot at 11 right when they opened. I remember we didn't talk about my concussion while we were there. As far as the waiter and everyone else in the restaurant was concerned, I was just an average person without any brain injuries, and that was priceless. So what I wanted to focus on in this section in terms of craft elements was the idea of moving in and out of time. And this was a concept I was really inspired by in our first semester of the course while reading Wild by Cheryl Strayed. And what she does is she goes from her time of struggle and her time of wanting to give up on everything and morphs it in to blend with her time while hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. So what she does is she flashes from the present of the narrator back to when she was struggling. So that's what I did in my memoir. So you'll see that things are sort of out of order as I've read them, and that's actually the order that they appear in the actual memoir. I start with the accident scene, and then I go back to when I was younger and in the sport, and then I come back to after the accident and end up at the present. So that was something I was really inspired by when reading her memoir, because I realized that you don't have to write it in chronological order. You can kind of play around with the order of things, and that was something that I really enjoyed figuring out how to do while writing, because this is the way I feel I get my truth across the best. The final section I'm going to read is the last section of the memoir itself, and it's my perspective today, which I thought would be a really cool thing to include in terms of identity. April 2018. I never got to perform that new floor routine in competition. I think it still haunts me to this day, as though I still have a whole lot of unfinished business in the sport. Sometimes I will dream that I'm back in the gym, performing the skills I used to love and being surrounded by my coaches and teammates as though I never left. There are times in these dreams that I'm aware of the fact that I did leave, and yet I'm back in competition and have to throw together a routine. But gymnastics still weaves its way through my mind, coming through in the subconscious where it can't in my day-to-day. There are the constant marvels that I can't seem to shake. The questions, unlike some, will never quite be answered. I wake up from these dreams with a sense of emptiness. I will probably never do those skills again. They're a part of my history, though they remain a dreamy part of the present. I wake up as the version of me who went to sleep the night before, still so undefined in many ways. But that's what leaves room for the evolution of our spirit and the metamorphosis of our souls. I'm not the girl I was in 2011 with big gym dreams, or even 2014 so muddled in depression that she could barely function. No, I'm something else entirely, and I'm leaving room for progression, letting go of what seems like a definite. That undone routine will never be done. These dreams make me recall a memory from my competition days. At the end of the hall at Deary's Gymnastics, you'll find a locked door that says, "Do not enter." I always found it a mystery until the day we had to trade one low beam in storage for another. We went and retrieved the other beam once Robin unlocked the door, all the while crossing by what appeared to be a ghost gym, full of dusty vault tables and old sets of uneven bars. It was a parallel to times past, as though some part of earlier teams lived on, the memories of former gymnasts doing pirouettes among the cobwebs on the ceiling. I wondered in that moment what it would be like for the gymnast part of me to disappear, what sort of identity I would have if not for the sport. I thought of the gymnasts who had come and gone from Deary's over the years. What were they doing now? Were they happy? I'd let the moment pass without another thought, setting my focus on the rest of practice, completely oblivious to the fact that all of those questions were something I'd have to face myself in a few years. Those feelings are brought back with my ghost identity from those gymnastics dreams, but there's something that I understand now that I didn't that day back in the back gym. The different eras of gymnast never truly fade away. That word gymnast sticking with me as I get older and is still in the back of the minds of all the people I shared the journey with. Those dreams remind me of an identity that I never meant to lose, but somehow managed to slip away. And that's okay, because there are new identities waiting to become a part of us if we just let go of the ones we've outgrown enough to be all in. So the concept I want to talk about with this segment is probably the greatest one I talked about in my critical piece, which is polyvocality within memoir, and that just means that there are several voices. So I go from the Quinn who is in gymnastics and talking from that perspective of battling with fear and going for skills, to the Quinn on the day of the accident, and then the version of myself following the accident and in recovery. And then today, when I feel like I'm fully recovered from the concussion, but its impact is still very much with me as my life goes on. So those different voices all play a role in the memoir itself and make it what it is. And this is derived a lot from postmodernist theories, Vivian Gornick, who I quoted before, being one of them. And it's the idea of subjectivity of identity. So pretty much the voice that you have is from the where and when that you are in at the moment. And that's really important when it comes to memoir, because we become different versions of ourselves as time goes on, and it's important that we are able to honor that through writing. So in conclusion, I wanted to leave you with a quote from William Zinsser, and it's, "Memoir is the art of inventing the truth." And that's not to say that it's invalid or that it's a lie. It's to say that you need to find the truth that you want to express and find a way to do that through this genre of creative writing. And it's a very important piece of us that we should be able to share with the world, to challenge the grand narratives and to just get what we want to say out there for the world to hear. Thank you.